Hello, and thanks for joining us today on the Higher Ground podcast. I'm your host, Tom Castriota, and I got the idea for this podcast during a coaching session I had with one of my mentees. I thought to myself, this stuff could be gold, or at least moderately useful. Maybe I can record it so you could benefit too. Then it dawned on me I can record conversations with my friends, mentors, and other colleagues, most of whom are way more successful and interesting than I am. A few months and about a zillion edits later, this podcast was born. So, whether you're preparing for an interview, seeking a promotion, or just curious about what's in the minds of hiring managers, executives, or other interview candidates, then this podcast is for you. Join us as we explore real career journeys, one story at a time. And if you actually do like the show, well, you know what those buttons do down at the bottom. Thanks again for watching. Oh, and from the lawyers, views expressed on the Higher Ground podcast are the personal opinions of our guests and me, your host, and do not necessarily represent the views of their employers, past or present. Hey, hello, everyone, and welcome to Higher Ground, where today we'll be talking with Ken Pouliot, who is a longtime friend of mine. We're figuring out 24 years we've known each other, and time just absolutely flies. Ken's going to talk with us about some of his experiences around interviewing. As you know, that's the goal of this podcast, and I'm going to start off with introductions. Ken, if you would mind, introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are.
When you've known people for over 20 years, it's kind of like birthdays. You just don't say it so much because it just makes you feel that much more older.
Yeah, that's true. It's like we've known each other for a while.
Yeah, it's just a while. It's new, just like on the resume, how you might lie about your age. No, just kidding. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of actually knowing Tom for a long period of time. Obviously, he's a good friend of mine at the same time. So Ken Pouliot, who am I and what do I do? So I've been in the software SaaS business for almost roughly about 30 years. My main goal really is to help smaller companies, usually in their kind of like, I would say B rounds / C rounds, really help them scale their organizations from a go-to-market perspective. And so usually running that from a revenue perspective as a CRO. And that's what I've been doing for the last like 20 years. So started as an IC, an individual contributor, salesperson, and then which is where I got to know you and Jim and a couple other really good friends. And then really, like I said, grew that out to where today I'm currently running a global revenue team at SOCRadar. And as we're growing, trying to get it from the revenue it is now to either an IPO or an acquisition.
Outstanding. Yeah, no, that's been a long time since the Alpha Blocks days, where we were convincing people business intelligence is going to change the world, and you need to have Legos in all of your browsers
Java
because
blocks. Java blocks.
who knew, right? Who knew about server side technology? What is this all about, right? Those were the days, wild times, good times. So, we like what the objective here is to talk about different experiences around the interview process and hiring and such. And, I figured maybe we'd start off with just a question about how has your perspective changed over the years on hiring? How's the hiring experience changed for you and your?
Yeah, it was funny. A good person I used to know on the other side of this mic told me you should hire whoever you like to have a beer with. And so and there's some truth in that from a cultural perspective, but there's also that can lead down to negative aspects, right? Because if you hire too many like-minded people, you don't get really good encouragement to try different things. And so I would say I was definitely a person who leaned a lot more onto the cultural fits and people fits instead of looking at them holistically. And I didn't realize at that particular point in time, sometimes in a team, it's really good to have different opinions, different age groups, different people from different genders, different sizes, and everything else, because you can be and get a much better perspective for blind spots and exposure. So that's definitely something that's changed over the years. I'm also a lot more data driven than I was way back when.
how do you get
I'm
that?
like saying, no surprise. He knew it when I could barely count up and add a check. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a nice change. We change, we adapt, we
yeah,
grow.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I think what did we used to call it was the airport test, right? I think that was one of the fun ones. Like, would you either would if you were stuck at an airport with this person, you missed your flight, maybe your connecting flight, and you had to sit with them for an extended period of time, 5 or 6 hours. Would you want to kill yourself or this person, or would you manage your way through it? Right. That was always a reasonable check.
I say that a lot about a lot of my relatives as well. So just haven't gotten
Yeah,
to Thanksgiving, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Especially
yeah,
during the
yeah.
holidays. Yeah.
Listen, I do think listen, there's e- especially in the go to market function, it's important to find people who can communicate and be able to carry on conversations and be able to, especially how they craft their ideas and they explain things are always really important. And those come with, like I said, longer conversations,
Hmm.
more drawn out over coffee or a dinner than sometimes what you'll see on a resume, right? Because that's going to be, the key. Um, when you meet people and when you really want to put them in important positions.
Absolutely. No,
Are
I
you
think you
laughing
really.
at me even as I give these conversations? I'm trying. These are gems, baby.
Yeah,
Gems.
gems. I know, without a doubt. You just reminded me though of it was one of the funnier moments of like recruiting. There was a gentleman whose name I won't mention, but he was on the Alpha Blocks team. I was looking to hire him as a regional manager.
Yeah.
If you remember, the recruiter had said, we were going to go out to dinner because we were about to make him an offer. He met with everyone. I wanted to get to
Yeah.
know him, and the recruiter had said, we're looking for a vegetarian option. And I was like, vegetarian. This is 20 years ago. I wasn't the kind of person I am today.
You weren't as
But
evolved.
I have evolved. Yes, my whole philosophy used to be like, if it didn't make noise when it was alive, I won't eat it. Now, so it's vegetarian. I was like, oh man, vegetarian. This is got to be tough, even in New York, right? And in the early 2000s, it
Yeah.
wasn't what it is today. And I said, well, I'll do my best. I'll try to figure it out. And then he says, well, let me see how flexible the candidate is. And called me back and said, how about a steakhouse? I was like, that's quite a shift. Can you give me a little bit of backstory here? Because I don't quite understand
Kosher
how
steak.
it was a kosher steakhouse. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You remember. And, we had a nice meal, we had a nice time, but I was just like, why didn't you just tell me up front? Like, it's a kosher thing. And, I understand the reluctance, a little bit of trepidation there, but like at the end of the day, it worked out. But it was an interesting way to again to come across that level of diversity without coming at it fast.
There you go.
Hi,
There's that beautiful face.
there he is.
I Little did they know they'd be working with the two of us,
Yeah,
and that would
I know, right?
totally.
And imagine I'm the tech guy. That's the scary part.
And that's how our relationship started. So,
It is.
it went from there.
It is. It is. It went uphill though. It wasn't downhill. It
Yeah,
went
yeah,
uphill. It improved over time. So you were going to say. So we just recapped one of our stories about.
yeah.
Oh
Just you
yeah.
just came. You're good now.
All right. I'm back. I'm back, baby. So you were going to add a point. We were just talking about, getting to know your candidate, going out to dinner, really get to know them on like that personal level, making sure you still want to hang with them after you've been in the airport for a while.
Yeah. I actually, there was kind of a funny thing. It was like I had experienced this actually through an interview process. So, well, two is I think for me, it's really important to break bread.
Yeah.
I think it's a critical element. It allows people to kind of hopefully loosen up a little bit more, so you can actually have conversation with them. And then, honest to God, as I tell everybody, the biggest job I have since I've ever moved into management, and I think actually Jim Camella told me this a long time ago, was I never want anybody to join an organization that I'm involved in, especially managing, where they don't know everything they need to know.
Yeah.
Because every job is an important decision, not only on your potential for career and your W-2, but more importantly about here's where you're going to spend the next like 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years of your life, and you need to make sure it's the right fit for you. And so it may look like that on paper, but then when you go out and you have coffee with someone, you really get a chance to hear a little bit more of the culture, and that you can't pick up easily from a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And so you can figure out, okay, are they going to fit in or not fit in? Especially now, for me, what becomes more crucial is I'm usually trying to start a culture.
Mm,
And so I'm trying to find what I would call cultural touchstone people who can say they're going to work really, really, really hard. They're going to come to work every day with a smile and just be like, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread, and have an aptitude to learn. Right. And so, and have that passion, because you really need that in B round software companies.
sure.
Is you're trying to build out this incredible culture for scaling to get to 100 million to 200 million. And so if you bring these people in now, then you have your bedrock of where other people that come on, there's great, the more you hire, the greater risk is you're going to not hire someone ideal. So it's really important in the beginning hires to find those really good cultural people that can knock it out of the park, so that they can take your messaging, the things that you're talking about, things that you're trying to build on, and you can make sure that that's being embedded at the very, very lowest level and at the highest level of the organization.
Got it. Oh, that's great. Thank you. And how do you, so for those of us who don't know, myself included, where's the stratification between like Series A, B, C, et cetera? Like you mentioned
Yeah.
200 million is the target.
Yeah. So that's a good question.
I get
This
it.
is this is where my wife and everybody goes, Ken, not everybody lives in your world, right?
Ah,
So, uh, and ain't that the truth? That's probably 99% of people. So in software companies in general, especially in SaaS companies, you usually have your A round. Your A round is usually considered a lot of angel investors. You might get a small player investor that likes to go in, and those are usually in an A round. If you think about it, you probably in the first round, the first thing you did is you went and you asked your friends and your family for like $100 or $200. You've maxed out all your credit cards to do whatever you can to kind of keep something floating, just to get a valuable or most, an MVP kind of product out there, right? So
mm,
that something's out there. And then what happens is in that, it's kind of like I would say the second half of the angel round, that A round, once you start finding market fit, you get 2 or 3 customers. Once you've got 2 or 3 customers, then investors want to start coming in, because usually investors want to get in early, but they want to make sure that you have a market fit,
mm,
and that you have what's called an ICP, or the right targeted group of people, so that you can be focused with your spend and focused on where you want to go. And so usually that's like around before 10 million, right around 10 million. And
mm,
then you to revenue, 5 to 10 million in revenue. Once you get 10 million, that usually means I've got 20, 30 customers. I've got a good market fit. I've got good things. And then what you start to need is you need gas,
mm,
right? And then now how do I accelerate to go from the 10 million or 20 million now to 50 to 100 million? And that's all go to market. It's not so much the product issue anymore. Now it's like you may pivot a little bit here and there, but now it's really the go to market function and how do you scale it really fast,
mm,
right? And then you start to figure out, well, okay, now that I've got 100 clients or 200 clients or 300 clients, now, are they the right clients? Am I getting the right? Now you start making more strategic decisions after that. So that B round, or after A round, B round, that's also when you start to see people come in like 10 million, 20 million, 50 million and make investment. And it's usually the investment, usually 9 times out of 10, is to build a go to market engine,
got it.
and to make it scale. And so that's where I come in. There's a lot of people that come in at different levels, right? You sometimes also have different executives that come in 100 million to 200 million.
Mm,
Those are the guys now that have to take you public, right? And so they understand, what does it take to build a more metric, kind of like a bigger kind of organization that it takes you to get to 100. And then there's the people who are always public guys,
mm,
and executives who are in the public. Little different disciplines all the time, especially in hiring and where you want to be. As you know, being in startup land, right?
mm,
There's a lot more, you might say, flexibility on certain things. And then with, going into like an SAP or a Google or something like this, there's a lot more stringency in the process.
yep.
And so, it depends on where. This is where I always tell people, in your life, you will find out where you feel comfortable
Mm,
and where you feel like you belong, right? It's like the band of Misfit Toys. Like there's going to be one area that you feel like, okay, I'm there, right? And
yeah.
so for me, quite honestly, when we met, I realized I was an A, B round guy.
Mm,
And so having worked in a couple of larger companies, I liked it, but I also felt like I was a caged animal.
mhm.
And I didn't like it, right? So it's
Sure.
kind of, I find this, by the way, very fascinating, just on the side. Uh, Everybody wants what the other has, right? So A, B round guys, sometimes, you'll get sometimes people, they'll pull people in from really large companies and they're like, oh, it's kind of like, well, how come I don't have all these people helping me? How come I don't have assistants? How come I don't have this? How come I don't have this?
Yeah.
How come I don't have a team of people to help me with getting a quote out or whatever it might be?
Yeah.
They just operate better in environments where there's a lot of things that are heavily matrix. And it's funny because the software guys always think, well, that's what I need. I need one of those guys to help me build the matrix, right? And then they crumble. And then the guys who are really big, I just remembered at SAP, they used to say, we just want those crazy, crazy startup guys because they know
Yeah.
they just wear 20 million hats and they
Get it done.
build bridges and do whatever. And then they get in, they go, holy crap, these guys just blew up 5 things. It's five contracts we can't live to, and liability was all off. And
Yeah.
what the hell were they doing? What were they thinking? Right? Like,
Like, where's my risk review of this project?
yeah,
Like, where,
yeah, right.
you know,
It's like,
how did it get this past
yeah,
compliance?
yeah,
Or
how did, who sent this through? Like,
committee?
what happened? Like,
Yeah.
I signed the document. You're not allowed to sign the document. You're on level 5. This needed a level 26.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's hilarious.
it's kind of funny. They want that person, but they don't want that
Yeah.
person. So,
Yeah.
which is interesting. And I tell anybody who hires, if you get a chance, you got to figure out what's good for you. A Google might be a great place for you.
Sure.
A Microsoft or a good things. I think it was actually Gadwell or one of the guys was saying it was very interesting. He goes, belonging to a very big Fortune 500 company is a great way to retire, pretty rich or pretty high up, right? Because
Mm.
your stock options, things you can do, and everything else would be great. So if you're a person that wants just a different type of risk in that kind of infrastructure, that's great. Or if you're a person who can tolerate high risk, then you come a little bit more into, my neck of the woods.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a balance, right? I think, and I think particularly, at least from the lens that I took through this, I found like as a younger person, like just last week. No, it was much easier to accept risk when my kids were
Yeah.
very young,
Yeah.
but it had the challenge of travel, and it was like, all those bits. But then now as I've gotten older, kids are out of the house, right? It's like, okay, I can accept a different degree of risk, but do I
Yeah.
want that? Do I want that craziness, the chaos? Or do I like, that's the balance. And the company I'm at now, I find it's hard to move the needle. There's just so much, to make an impact, even for a technology company. But
And a
whereas,
technology company that prides itself on new stuff,
yeah,
right?
yeah, it's
So,
some conundrums. Yeah,
yeah. So challenges.
yeah, it's all good. No,
Yeah.
it's all good. How do you how did you get into how did you move from sort of the rep role into management to now, the global leadership role, right? Or like where you're not just managing the quota, or your own book, right? It's
Yeah.
you're a manager of managers, and now you're manager of reps, and then a manager of managers. How did you
Yeah.
find that transition?
Well, I would tell you, I was asked this not that recently and I had to think about it. And I was like, um, I myself, I was been very, very, very lucky to work for a lot of great managers before me, who allowed me to exceed and really have amazing W-2s, right? So there was a point in period of time where you say, how many more times can I be? And I say this and I feel weird saying it. So you're like, how many more times can I be in the top 5 or the number 1 guy? And so you get bored, right? You're like, okay, I know exactly what it's going to take to be number 1, right? And fortunate in a couple different companies where those W-2s can reach pretty high, right? And so it was at actually one company where they had said, oh, no one's ever done this before, and this kind of patch and everything else, and came in and then became number 1 globally, right? In a global company. I think they were the number 3 global software company at the time. And that was like, so I was like, all right. And then they were like, hey, as after the acquisition, and that company got acquired, and I was there after the acquisition, they went and they had me go do training. And I find I really, 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 really enjoyed training
Hmm.
because I really liked telling people like, okay, let's sit down and see what you're doing,
Hmm.
and let's see how we can be better. And so, I liked it so much that I was like, if there's a spot that does open up, I would love to have a spot.
Hmm.
And so I got a chance to run a team at Symantec, and then never look back. And
Hmm.
then it's about once you start doing that, it's like you learn a lot,
Sure.
but you're not good at it. But this is really like so in sales, the hardest part of the entire world is about giving up your wallet. Because when you move into management,
Your
I
wallet.
know you're
Oh,
gonna
oh, oh, in terms of like
see
your
when you're a sales guy,
ah,
not the funny thing is in any other career path, moving into management's a good thing because eventually sometimes you top out, right? And you've got to move around to manage people. And especially for like coding and a lot of other things, the more people you manage, the higher up you get, the more money you get, the more stock options,
yeah,
everything else, right? In sales, literally your IC, your individual salespeople can make more money than the CEO and a lot of other people. And so that's a really, really difficult WT to leave.
mm,
Um, but you have to say, like, hey, am I really happy doing this? And so I was like, no, I'm not as happy as I am training people.
mm,
And I had a lot more fun going around training people than it is. So in sales, you give up a lot to move into management. And it's a very, 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 very difficult thing when you see people making so much more money that
could have
are
done that. That could
yeah,
have been why,
right. But it's also the number one reason bad things sales managers do is we hire a bunch of people who are really good at sales, but they were lousy coaches.
mm,
And you didn't look at them the right way to say, can
sure.
this person be a really good coach? And it's hard because as a go-to-market person and as an AE, you're trained to be a lone wolf. And now
Mm,
you got to go from lone wolf to how can I herd a pack? And then how can I herd cats? Right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
the higher up you go, the harder it gets.
yeah,
And the more your wallet gets split by now 60, 30, 100 people for them to pull them along the way. So,
sure.
but I found immense joy in it.
Mm,
I still do. I just really like helping people. And I realized when I sat down, and you do self analysis, two things. One is I wanted to be really good at something else after
mm,
sales. And then two, I found out that, in sales, what was the core thing that I really liked was helping people.
mm,
And so that same kind of passion that I had about helping my clients make sure that they were making good decisions was the same thing I have now in helping companies hopefully make good decisions. And then hopefully we all get to the same place.
yeah. And it seems like so the trade you're basically making is short-term cash for long-term equity, right?
Yeah, you're going up to the big guys table, right? It's
Yeah.
like, in poker, you're now walking into the back room, right?
And that's
Where the whales play, right? So
yeah,
it's a big hit or miss, right?
yeah,
So one of the big things that you get is if you hit really, really well, you walk away and you retire early, right?
sure.
But I remind people, 80, 90% of the companies don't even get past 75,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So not all of them are going to be smash hits. It's going to
sure.
be a little bit of a struggle. Again, this is where hopefully though, if you like the culture of it, one of the dreams I always had was if I could be a good widget for a VC. At that time, there weren't PEs involved, but
Mm,
if I could be a really good widget, then I would probably always be able to get a good job. And
sure.
so, if you can help scale companies and you can do it effectively, with decent cost savings, then you keep you around a little bit longer. They let you get gray hair like me.
Well, you're not alone. Tell me, that's interesting. I hadn't considered the dynamic has changed quite a bit from back in the day when it used to be
Ah,
like we used to just you'd have VCs and then we'd have like licensed software that was distributed on a device, we'll call it, it used to be like a disk. But like, all right, I'm dating myself and my
man,
kids
could
apparently,
do. By the way, could do side letters. You could do a lot of stuff. It was amazing times, right? The dynamics have changed. The dynamics have changed drastically, and hiring has changed because of it, right? So, all of that has kind of shaped and formed.
sure.
We also have changed. You go back and forth on this over the last. I've seen this over the last 10 years, but you go a lot of back and forth and you just have to be wary when you're hiring, or when want to be hired. That we go from when the economy is really good,
Yep.
VCs and PEs want to put more gas and want to hire more people because they think that it's always going to keep growing,
Sure.
and so it's just a people person, not sometimes a tech problem. And so when that happens, there's a lot of hiring. It's something you need to take a look at. Are they hiring 50, 60, 70 people? Because usually the tendency was to overhire and you can always fire,
Yep.
right? I think now with PEs, bankers more
Mm,
involved, a lot more you hear the term efficient growth being
interesting.
used a lot more. And so, which is good because I think that's good on the hiring basis because you're not over hiring as much. You're really looking to make sure that every hire has got a good ROI. And the other thing that's drastically changed in my time is sales enablement. Sales enablement went from a nice to have, like, hey, there's that guy in marketing that doesn't really have a great job, to wow, you have dedicated heroes and really, really good VPs of sales enablement now,
Mm.
who I think are critical because the world has changed on us. And one of the things that's changed is short term hires, right? People, especially in go to market, used to stay 3 to 4 years. Now people are lucky if they stay in a job for more than a year, right? And they're looking. So if you aren't training them and helping them succeed in their career path,
Yeah.
then it's a quick exit. It's like really funny. I would imagine, when you look at your own father, I look at my father, right? Like they would have one or two jobs, right? Their whole entire lives, and that and
Yeah.
that was it. And then literally, I remember coming out of school. This is a long time ago. This is 90s. If anybody wants to go back that far, believe it or not, there were TVs. And so if you go back to that time, that was just starting to see where people were moving around and they had more than one or two jobs for
Yeah.
their lifetimes.
Yeah.
And now we've gone to, sadly, you look at a lot of resumes where people are only in place for maybe a year, maybe 2 years max.
Do you
And
think
so
that's
it's now,
is that a flag for you in terms of like a lot of spin on their CV? Like where's the line where that becomes too much? Because I do get it. Like I look back over my own CV, half the companies I work for were either bought or went out of business, right? And most of them
so
bought. But,
there's two different kind of aspects. One
yeah.
is they got bought, and you
Mm.
just happen to be in you're buying kind of like tsunami, right? So, well, I will tell you, like right now, we're going to be going into a very, very large M&A kind of cycle, right?
Mm.
Because money's back. Everybody believes that everybody's going to be flush for a little while, and so everybody's going to be looking to say, how can I double my growth, right, or
Mm.
get above 30 to 40% growth? And so a lot of that's going to be inorganic. So people are going to look to M&A. So if you just got hired and you're there for 1 year, that's where I look and I say, did a merger happen, an acquisition happen, or industries are pretty tight and they talk,
Yeah,
so
sure.
everybody knows. That's why you really can't lie,
Mm.
because everybody kind of knows, or especially in the SaaS industry, if you've stayed in one vertical for another, like marketing, tech, or security, or whatever. Everybody kind of knows about the
Mm.
vendors. It's not that big of a space anymore.
Interesting. Thanks. That's an interesting perspective. So one of the questions I wanted to touch
You
on
like
was
how we went from all the way to the changes of VC and PEs in the marketplace? That was so I could somehow seem a little bit more smarter at the end of this conversation.
I'm just not quite sure where to go with that one. So,
That's all right. Next question.
yeah. So let's talk about conflict. Like, I guess
Uh,
one of the tricky bits, right? Depending on your level, like if you're a manager versus a director versus a CEO, right? You can have different levels of conflict. But I always wonder, like, how do you resolve the issue where you love this candidate, you want to hire them, they're your go-to, but the rest of the team is like, no way, this or this, these reasons why not to, or even vice versa. Like the red team comes to you with this candidate and they're like, this
yeah.
person's the best thing since sliced bread, and you're like, look, I got these flags. Like, what's your mode for navigating conflict like that?
So the first thing you can do to navigate, I've found in every single battle I've ever had, the way to navigate around issues is data. Is
Hmm.
by So the first thing I try to do, especially when I in this new job, we came in and we start looking at how we hire people. And in particular, I said, okay, do we have a standard process
Hmm.
of we're looking at like elements of their resume, we're looking at testing or certification they've gone through, so that we're all reviewing the candidate with maybe a little less bias
Hmm.
and a little bit more openness to looking at the data elements instead of the person or the individual.
Okay.
And so if I've always say like, hey, if there's a red flag or I go, wow, I'm really nervous about this person, so two things. If the data is so compelling in one direction and it's only
Hmm.
me, then I'll actually sometimes remove myself from that decision, saying, hey, there is something here that I'm not comfortable with, but you know what? The data all looks the same. You guys went through all this test. He looks exactly, or she looks exactly like the profile of people who've done well here before.
Hmm.
Then it might be there might be a hidden bias in my perspective,
That
and
you're
then
not
I pull
casting.
myself out.
Yeah.
And I think that's when any discussion comes up about hiring or other things, if you can if you can be a data driven
Data
company,
driven. Yeah.
data driven decisions, then you have less of this. You have less bias,
Sure.
and more openness to possibly candidates that can come from other perspectives.
Yeah. I do think
So
the advantage, at least in that scenario, of taking yourself out of the equation is if they flame out or something goes really bad, then you could say, I told you so.
yeah, yeah.
I'm
I mean,
just
you
kidding. I'm
can,
only kidding.
right?
I'm joking.
You try to, you know what? Listen, you try to. There's always going to be as big now safety nets, right? You try to build safety nets for your managers so that they can make bold decisions if they want to, and
Mm,
so sometimes you have to let them. I, though, on the opposite side of the fence, am a very big quick to hire, quick to fire. So
mm.
I do not wait more than 90 days. So if someone came in and it was like, wow, okay, there's a couple things that I'm really worried about here, but everybody seems to say I'll back out. I'll let the person get hired, but then we make sure that we have certification so that if the person hasn't done the thing that we were expecting in the first 9 days, that's the other thing too, is I think you have to be really, really clear on what the expectation of this person is in their first 90 days.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so have some testing, have some other things, and then flush them out. And if they pass all of those, well, then, like I said, maybe you had some hidden bias that didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder though, like that works, that approach lends itself very well to a sales organization, right? Where
yeah.
you can very much you can act fast. You'll see the progress, the contacts, the pipeline filling up, et cetera.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
like with a software engineer or product manager or program manager, I think you need a
Less
longer
window.
runway, obviously. But
Yeah.
I do think there's a lot of it's very good counsel to consider the setting expectations, being very clear about them, and then having a timed sets of timed measurement for when you need
Yeah.
to deliver or not.
Yeah, I listen because I think the problem is that we all go into yearly reviews, right? Which we're all doing right now, and the problem is that doesn't give you ample time, especially for engineers, right? And work that they're doing and everything else to be
To
able to
show
look at them.
results,
So
right?
yeah, so you should probably think about in the beginning of any hiring for people outside the go-to-market position to find out how can I do quarterly reviews, right, to make sure that they're going right, and maybe after 2 quarters, you can start de-risking by looking at bringing in other people. The other
Mhm.
big thing I tell managers all the time, and this is something every manager forgets doing. Every manager forgets doing that I've ever known, right? I've never met one person who actually did this well, is that they don't keep a constant bench. Um, and so, I tell managers all the time, no matter what you are, you should always be looking for talent. Always be looking for talent because
Interesting.
you are always going to lose people and you are always going to gain people. But when you're sitting there, and so this is the same thing I noticed this personality trait. When salespeople in general have a lot and they hit their number and they're above their number, they're master negotiators at that particular point in time because they know they've already made their number.
Mm,
They're already high on cash, right? And they already feel like, kings of the world, right? So therefore, they're really good about not doing things you don't want them to do and really focus on only opportunities that are going to move the needle for the company.
yeah.
I find that same kind of characteristics happen for managers, hiring managers. And what I tell them is when you have 3 or 4 people that you know in the marketplace that you've been kind of like culling over the last couple of years saying, hey, come, 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 come. When there's an opening, come. And then when they're open to it, and then you have an opening, you say, hey, by the way, someone just left, please come. It just makes them a completely different hiring manager
Mm,
than before because one, they're seeing what's out there. That's the hard thing with a hiring manager. Sometimes you're looking there and you go, if I get rid of this person, am I just, maybe you haven't hired 2 or 3 people right or something's gone.
sure. A little
And that mojo,
gunshot maybe, or like
yeah,
your
right?
full
Happens
confidence. Yeah.
happens a lot, right? Where people
Yeah.
are like, I go, why didn't you fire that person? They're like, well, because I just didn't really want to look for another person. You're like, that's
Mm,
terrible,
yeah.
right? That
It's the
says a
wrong
lot
answer.
about you as a manager. And
Yeah.
so I said, you don't want to keep people who are mediocre that you can't train up. So I
Yep.
always tell people, bench, 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 baby. Keep. You don't always be going out there. Every single event you go to, this is where you don't have to be a salesperson. Every conference you go to, you should be looking and asking, not getting people's resumes all the time, but you should be meeting other people in the industry so that when you go, hey, either a network effect of what people they may know, or by the way, just finding out people who are out there and saying, hey, if you know anybody, we might have some positions open next year, maybe
Mhm.
not. And just keeping that alive as I call it an active funnel for possible opportunities is a good thing for you.
Yeah. No, that's very good counsel. I think that makes a ton of sense.
I think we
Yeah.
might have to end here pretty soon here, Tom. That's like the third time you said that was good counsel. So I feel like
Can you
I'm
tell?
riding
Can you
a
tell him
really,
work?
really big high right now.
Can you
So
tell him to work with lawyers lately? Let me get like that's good advice. How about it? I'll make it less legal sounding.
maybe it's because all the books behind you. It makes you look so much more
That's
intelligent.
what it is. Yeah, osmosis. It's osmosis. It's going from the into the screen. Here's one. I'm just curious. Like, what your like? A lot of times people give out advice. I'm guilty of this as well. Like, interview advice. People are asked for, what would you do in this scenario? What would that scenario? And I think um, generally we all come from a good place. What would you say is a common, like a common piece of advice people give for the interview process that's actually terrible?
Advice that's terrible. That's a good one. Advice that's terrible.
No,
I, you know, it's funny when you interview. I see more. I see really, really bad advice in sometimes really young people who are joining the company who
mm,
have entry level. I don't see so much bad advice, except for I think sometimes, believe it or not, people just I don't want to say it's bad advice, but people think that they can still wing it. And they go, it's
interesting.
that their personality will overcome a lot of things, and they don't
Interesting.
really, really grind into having like case studies of their career and what matches what the
Like
company's
the
looking
job.
for.
The
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I
Interesting.
find a lot of people come and they're like, "Ah, bah, bah, bah." It's like funny. I don't know who's. I don't know. It's really bad advice if someone gave it to them, but like it's the same thing you see in sales. Like it's kind of like I'm going to start talking and I'm going to start saying everything I possibly can about why you should hire me instead of sitting back, asking questions,
Asking
having
questions.
feedback, having to go
Yeah.
back, have a couple case studies of your career and why it matches the opportunity.
Sure.
I just people don't do that. People don't do it well at all.
Yeah, I think talking, you should, I forget what the ratios you get. What is it? 2 ears and one mouth, right? You should be listening
Uh,
more than you're talking, twice as much. I think in particular that's useful for the interview process is really understanding because you'll get clues. And if you've got a hiring manager that really wants to bring you on board, if you ask them, what are you looking for in a candidate before you start telling them what you've done, you can change your story to match what they just told you they're looking for in a candidate. Like it's almost a no-brainer, right? But people typically don't do it. But and for those of you listening out there, that's good advice. That's not bad advice.
yeah, I don't know. I've never heard anybody give. You know, I don't hear many people. A lot of times people give advice. I will tell you, people think it's always about the resume,
It's
right? Like
always about the resume.
always about the resume. Like, and I think it is true nowadays because resumes can go through kind of a process very, very quickly.
Yep.
So maybe that's a little bit more true than I've seen from an executive level. But I would say I still think it's about the interview and meeting the people and
Being the
talking
people.
about
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah. I think of them in stages. I think you described like the pipeline, right? So you've got the resume gets you the interview gets you the next interview, and then eventually,
Yeah.
you keep flowing
But
down the pipeline. So it's an
I,
important piece, but it's not the only
and
piece.
there are a lot of good, they call them resume rippers services, right? Where they rip
Okay.
up your resume and they
Oh,
kind of tear it up and they look at new things. I will just say one of the thing that really resonates, and this is where I think Tom, you told me, someone told me, or my dad told me this. You should look at every single year, and you should every single year go off and spend 5 or 10 minutes thinking about all your accomplishments for the year. The hardest things about interviews that I find is people don't come with objective wins. Like I was able
oh,
to move
interesting.
the needle by 30% here. I was able to bring this project in on time. This
Sure.
project on time. And I was just helping someone with their resume this last weekend. I said, well, when you brought that, what did that mean? Oh, the company saved like $350,000. Okay. Well, that's a great nugget, right? Because then it
That's a
doesn't
great
matter
number.
what company did, everything else. But I'm like, we're all human beings, and we've all got a million other things doing, and we forget these things,
Sure.
right? So it's really important, I think, every year to write them down
Take
so
it down.
that when you do your resume again, you can put in numbers.
Yeah.
Numbers are key. Numbers
Yeah.
are like the saving grace.
Metrics are key. No, I agree with that. What would you say the strangest interview question you ever got was?
I
And was it from
remember.
me? And was it from me?
Yeah, no, it wasn't from you. There's another one for a longer story over a couple of sushi that I'll tell you. But one
Okay.
of the most interesting was I went out to California and it was a very big company that was growing like crazy. And I went out there and they were very into asking psychological questions.
Okay.
Like, because they wanted to see what your thought process was of going through something not job related, right?
Mm,
Because they figured everybody comes in and goes, all right, you can do this, 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 and you know what to say.
sure.
And so it was, and then I found out someone else, I think like I don't want to say Google, but somebody else started asking these questions too. And it was, if you were a penny and someone threw it at a fan, right?
Okay.
How do you think the penny could get through without hitting the fan blades or something, right? And then on that, I also got what's the one critical thing you think there isn't an easy solution for, no matter what society does,
Huh.
right? And
Okay.
so,
Those are two gems.
yeah, I mean, the penny one was like, this is not a good answer, by the way. Do not recommend. I just started laughing, and I said, if this is the most important thing that I've got to answer, then the
Yeah.
answer is I don't give a shit about the penny. I just care if we get the penny on the other side so we know how to spend it and we know how to save it. And that how can I shake the thing to get more pennies that
Oh
didn't
my
make it
God.
out
Yeah. I'm a
and pull it out
CRO. I love
as
it.
like as a revenue guy.
That's
Um, and
that's
I
fantastic.
do remember, by the way, the one about the society one, which was insane. And that was they wanted to see you tackle a large issue
Yeah.
and is not always easily solvable, like you've mentioned
Sure.
some of the things here. And that was I brought up homelessness and
Mm,
how I think homelessness is multiple pronged.
sure.
And I knew a little bit about two areas that I could go into some details on,
Sure.
about people education and a whole bunch of other things.
Yep.
And so those were the two that were the most interesting. But I just remember because it was a big phase at the time where it happened in California. It definitely wasn't New York companies, but because California companies, they were like, so let me tell you, if you were this and this, and then they would go like, what do you think? Why do you think your birth order has had an effect on your life? And I was like, I don't
Um,
know. It was just
Malcolm
like, dude,
Gladwell, maybe the
yeah. I
whole,
was like,
born in January versus.
let me go read that book and
Yeah. Yeah.
get back.
Interesting.
But it was interesting.
Let me get back to you. That's hilarious. Let me. What's the reference for that one?
But you know what? Like I said, they were all. That was like I just remember it was like for a couple of years, it was like a new thing of
New
interviewing,
trend.
which
Yeah.
was really trying to get you off track
Yeah.
and to get you just so they could see more about your personality. Now, I also listen, I give them a lot of credit because the hard thing is, especially, even looking at Google and looking at Box and looking at all these companies that were hiring like 200 people
Yeah.
a year, right? It's very, very hard to know that profile that always works.
Yep.
And unless you're going to do a psych eval, which some
Which you
companies do,
can't to cross 200 people. That's just cost
it's hard,
prohibitive. It's time
hard,
prohibitive.
right? Yeah. So you gotta think of certain things that kind of hopefully trigger that you get this other piece of a person, right?
Sure. Yeah, we had some gems. I remember when I was at a Japanese investment bank, we were
Wow.
hiring so many consultants, and we needed to basically create some filters just because you want to see if somebody could think creatively. So we would hit the sort of the classic, like why is a manhole cover round,
Yeah.
or one of my favorites. And this guy, he gave me the best answer ever. So intentionally, like one of the you want to see how somebody thinks about a weird question, right? And
Yeah.
we'd asked them we asked the question of, if you had an elephant, where would you hide it? Right? So you get the obvious answers of like, well, I'd find it an empty swimming pool, or like behind behind the
Yeah.
house. And the only wrong answer honestly was, I have no idea. Like, you got to take a stab at something, right? That was the same
Yeah.
with the
You
manhole
say
cover, right? But
you shoot it and then it's dead.
oh,
And then it's
that's a
easy to
terrible
move
answer.
it.
Oh my God. Yeah, cut it off. No, the best
This will
answer
be
ever.
another edit. Yeah, okay.
The dude, this one gentleman had gave just the hands down best answer. He goes, hide it. Why would I hide it? I have an elephant. I would ride it all over for everyone to see. I'm like, you are hired. That is the right. I didn't know there was a right answer, but that was the right answer.
That was the right answer. That was a good one.
Yeah,
Uh,
and he pulled it out. I was like, okay, let's get this guy into the next round.
and that's sometimes all you need. I think it's just
Yeah,
hard. You just got to be you because someone's got to hire you. I just think that that's the hardest thing is people think they can fake it. And then the problem is that sooner or later with
comes
enough
out in the wash.
interviews, It's
Yeah.
someone's going to figure out who you really are, and
Yep.
if you fake it enough, then it's going to come back to bite you in the butt.
Yeah, and I think you can't keep up the facade for
No.
even if you get through the interview process and get hired, your true
Yeah.
colors are going to show. It's like a relationship, right? Your true colors eventually show. Once the rosy glow of the early part of the relationship is
Yeah.
over,
First
you
couple
will
days,
you're going
right?
to show. That's why you should show it as early as possible. Get dumped. No,
Yeah.
and
You
get
can't start
hired.
leaving toothbrushes after the 3rd date,
Yeah,
right? So,
that's
because
a bad. I think that's a bad sign, right? That's
that's a
definitely
little early. That's a little
that's a
early,
little
right?
early. Yeah,
Type
yeah,
of
yeah.
rule. So,
I would agree.
yeah, no, I think, yeah, I think all these things are good advice. It's a little bit challenging for, like I said, people today because the other part you didn't have is tech makes it harder to interview.
Yeah,
I think, even though it's easier to go because you're not seeing so many people, and
yeah,
I think there's advantages there, especially for the vendor. But I think it makes it harder for human beings because you just it's less touch, less seeing people.
yep,
It's harder to crack that door. I get it 100%. But the only way you're ever going to crack it is being. I do say you can still be really inventive. And I've seen some people who've done just an absolutely amazing job bringing in like real stories, different things, trying
yeah,
different approaches, right? And those all work, especially then also research on the people that you know,
yeah,
right? And like, how well do you know me?
yeah,
How well do
yeah,
you know the company? And really digging down deep in those two aspects can be just that edge that gets you into one more
yeah.
interview.
No, it makes a lot of sense. So, all right, last question before we wrap. What is the
This is
one
the
thing
last
you
question.
want our listeners, of which there are one right now, I think, to take away? Let me rephrase it. What would you like our listener to know as your parting wisdom as we exit today's session?
I think, I'll tell you that, and I'll say this because it really pisses me off when people don't do it. And that is be prepared,
Hmm.
right? Like no matter what is going on in your life, if you're asking someone to have a job in a company, no matter what the position is, whether it's an executive or a lower level position, you're asking someone to pay you. You're asking someone to
Yeah.
trust their company in your hands, no matter what the position is. And I just think it's just a real travesty when someone comes unprepared. When someone's not like they don't know what the company does,
Yep.
if it's a public company, they didn't look at any of the public statements. They
Sure.
haven't looked at the space that they're in. They don't know their competitors. They don't know any. It's kind of like just haven't done any diligence,
Homework.
right?
Hmm.
And you look back and you go, "What were you thinking?"
Yeah.
And then literally, those are the times where I literally go, "You know what? I just think we don't even need 20 minutes for this call." I
That's your
end early.
threshold, right?
I'm just like, if you haven't done enough to be able to answer some basic questions about our space, the company, the vision that we've had, maybe the CEO's vision, right? Just all I can beg people is it's better for you to cancel the interview if something has come up than to
Yep.
do the interview unprepared.
Unprepared.
It's just really, really better to take the time and make sure you nail it than don't, because no matter how good you are, no matter how great you sound, no matter how good your resume looks,
Hmm.
you'll never get over that objective.
No, that's really. Think that's excellent advice. See, I can
Higher
learn.
ground, baby. Higher
I can
ground.
learn. Higher ground. Cheers. Yeah, I want to say thank you so much. Can we plug your company? Can we talk about your role?
Nah, hey, listen. You know what? I SOCRadar. So by the way, if anybody wants to go take a look at SOCRadar, we are hiring actually.
Okay, see, there we
Uh,
go.
we're going to be hiring like I could just find out today. We're going to be hiring like 60 engineers. So
6-0?
yeah.
That's a lot of
So
engineers in the United States, globally distributed.
combination globally.
Global,
So globally in the United States and in Europe. But
amazing.
no, I would say, listen, SOCRadar, great company, doing amazing things in a kind of a space that needs to be kind of like interrupted and kind of broken up a little bit. And so helping really democratize threat intelligence, which I think kind of needs it. So, but that's about it. But no, listen, hey, Tom, what can I
Tom,
say? You look so official with the glasses.
I
So,
know, right?
and the
You have
back, but
clear lenses.
I think this is a brilliant idea. I think a lot of people need more help, especially right now. I don't think a lot of people are talking about how it's a tight time right now, especially in technology and SaaS
Yeah,
companies. And so I think this is great to have as great advice and helping people move forward. So I think this is a brilliant idea. Glad I could help in any way and provide any help. Hopefully, some good nuggets.
You always do. I appreciate you, and thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening, and I genuinely appreciate you taking the time. And I'm gonna
No worries, bro.